This is the Almost Daily ZenCast. Hello, and Namaste. Thank you for tuning in to today's episode. I am your humble host, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo. Let's get started. Oh, hello there. Namaste to you, dear friends. It is 12:23. Almost nailed it at 12:22, I guess. Or 12:21. That would have been the groovy mirror-numbered number to nail it at. But a few days late and a couple dollars short seems to be the theme today. Hello and welcome to our Almost Daily ZenCast 333rd episode spectacular. I say with contempt in my own voice. I am your ever humble host, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo. This is the Almost Daily ZenCast. I humbly thank you for inviting me into your mind vis-a-vis the theater of your imagination and this magical thing we call a podcast, talk show, radio style, entertainment media piece, performance art. As I was approaching and over-anticipating and under-planning for the 333rd episode, it hit me that the roots of this show got lost in a way. And that, it's a silly project. I don't do it in the most professional way possible, in part because I don't have the means to, in part because I don't have quite the drive to, I guess. But also because I want to stay true to form. I want it to be authentically an unscripted sort of, conversation, if only between myself and I and me, and you, dear listener, as the audience, which is more important than we usually give it credit. But put a pin in that. We'll come back to it. If you're new to the show, welcome. The show is weird and quirky. I basically ramble at you about all kinds of various things, sometimes spiraling out of control in an endless, bracketing set of self-contained brackets. And other times I have these perfect episodes where I just seem to speak my mind quite directly about a subject, and I wish I could be on point like that every time. I was waxing nostalgical. I have been, both directly and indirectly, for the last couple of days, because this show sort of has most of its history captured, but split up oddly and unfortunately between two different YouTube channels that have behaved as sort of like the repository of things I've put up as I've tinkered with this project. And any longtime listener knows I've rambled before that this originally started out as a video project. If you have never heard me talk about that, lucky you. I've talked about it too often, probably. But if you're interested in the absurdity of it, and by no means do I pretend that this is like a high-quality project. This is not going to compete with your favorite celebrities' funny YouTube channel. It's weird and bizarre, and it was mostly for me as a sort of proof of concept. And I was taking it seriously to some extent, but also just working with the tools I had and the limitations I had. If you look up Mr. Zeppo on YouTube, I think you get like 3 or 4 big finds in the list, 2 of which are mine, and the other, there's another person using Mr. Zeppo somehow in his name, and I forget what the details are because I haven't looked at that page in forever. But you'll know if it's if you're on either of my two YouTube pages, not that forgive this self-indulgent self-promotion, but if you go to them and the banners on either of the two that I'm indicating to you are both images of sacred geometry, like in a fictional sort of artist rendering of deep space. And the newer one has only 11 subscribers. Huzzah to you, my 11 subscribers. In some ways, you are the reason I do what I do every day. Thank you. But I don't know how I pulled this off, but I have the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo. And if you want the most up-to-date YouTube version of this podcast to listen to and not watch, because it just has like a slide generated by Sprecher as the image for the video, that's your tab to go to. But if you're interested in the historical roots and some of the earlier episodes where I explain my position politically, like if you want to listen to Day 50 in Trumptopia, which is from 3 years ago and only has 3 views, which may or may not be all me. And quite frankly, this hot second, I couldn't quote you anything I said about being in the 50th day of Trumptopia. But I'm sure I was opinionated about it because I had 44 minutes and 20 seconds worth of stuff. There's also the quite interesting double episode entitled Season 1, Episode 2, both of them. But they have 2 different titles for some reason. The Part 1 is, what is the Trumtopian agenda really? And Part 2, the transcendental response to the Trumtopian agenda. Having no immediate, instant, vivid recall of what exactly I may or may not have said, I hold to this disclaimer. These are my opinions and my opinions alone. No one should get sued over them. I may or may not have been totally wrong about a bunch of stuff. But I do take some amount of pride in that I think I coined the term, or was one of the earliest people to use the term Trumptopia, which, if I may, for your own comedic pleasure, entreat you to consider, is the superior of the comedic names for this prototypical, pseudo-tyrannical, emergent phenomena that is the Donald J. Trump administration going off the rails as we barrel through 2020. You heard it here first, folks. Now, is Trumptopia the primary focus of why I do a podcast? Not really. It's an interesting entree. And having reached the 333rd episode, I've come to a sort of liminality point. I told myself that by the end of this year, I would decide whether or not I will continue to engage in this adorable hobby of mine, speaking my mind as one of many talking voices out there in the cornucopia of public discourse, and try to double down on it by branching out into a more focused, creative expression of the idea by recycling my own words and thoughts and opinions, but recontextualizing them and creating a animated series of sorts that would be kind of, although radically different, and its own brand, very much akin to, and some would argue wouldn't be able to have had without, although I think I had this idea before I ever heard of this other thing, but whatever. Art is lineaged the way it is, but I do tip the hat too, and will probably want to reference and homage and always praise the Midnight Gospel. So, to be clear about where I stand about that, for any new listeners that haven't already heard me overpraise this, this is a significant, important, potentially mind-bending piece of work. And I use the word work the way we do in theater. because it's many things at once. It is real interview material from actual podcast interviews. It is also a cartoon with its own life and world and universe unto itself, worth exploring. And it is, in many ways, a much better than I would have been able to render for myself example of precisely the kind of thing I would have loved to have done with my own project should it have been always operating at a higher order. Let's say I had been, theoretically, to not point any fingers at anybody else or whatever, or blame those who are not present, because you can't do that, right? But if I had been more successful in my own personal exploration of a series of career choices and had put away money, which I never really quite managed to do, yay, American lifestyle, no offense, but we are simultaneously encouraged to save and build wealth, and also encouraged to blow it all as soon as possible. And that doesn't really scale well when you're not making very much money to begin with, does it? But I digress. If I'd done better for myself, right, owning up to my own failings and my own shortcomings, and had the money to invest to create my own production company at this point, let's pretend, join me in theorizing a universe in which I, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo, achieved all those things, and had been able to hire a band and panel voices, performers, people to come in and out, drop of a hat or on the regular or etc. The full range of, sort of like a late night talk show, but on the radio and meant for whenever, for a podcast. So huzzah to that collaboration of minds that created the Midnight Gospel, because although completely different and totally their own brand, right? And I don't in any way, shape, or form believe they stole anything from me, right? I'm not that paranoid, thank you very much. Although this does seem to happen to me a lot. I have a really great idea that I never really quite build out into fully deployable form in any way, shape, or form. And then somewhere else in the collective, other minds arrive at something that is very much similar to in some key way. And what does that mean about me? What does that mean about me? It's always the question, right? It's not all about you, but you got to make it all about you until you don't make it all about you anymore. If that makes sense. So, where are we? Where have we lost control? Right, I was waxing nostalgic about the YouTube channel. And the significance there is that for anyone who looks only at the Sprecher.com feed, and you go to the very, quote, beginning of the show, the beginnings right now sort of don't really make sense. There's actually a bunch of relatively newer material that didn't originate back in the day, and forgive any confusion that's caused. I did that for artistic reasons, thinking I was going to have an ongoing group of collaborators, which, the pandemic and all of this, and me personally no longer being able to work, put an end to right quick. And I love you guys, miss you. I look forward to perhaps reuniting when all things start moving forward again. I don't say go back to normal, because that's a myth, just like common sense. Put a pin in that, because I've talked about that before, and if you're new to the show, you'll find it. So this show has gone through many iterations. And one of the mutations I've contemplated doing is going back and doing a massive redux. Trimming everything down, because it's logorrhea of the mouth. I've already been talking for 14 minutes. Sorry. Thanks for toughing it out, you dedicated listeners, you. And I stand daunted, literally past tense already, multiple times at looking through all the stuff that's on Sprecher, looking through all the salvaged audio files that I have that don't entirely represent all of the show's origin, I'm not sure if some of it is sort of salvaged here on St. Patrick's Day on YouTube on this original thing. The distinction being the word incorrigible, for those of you wondering. The older version of the YouTube channel does not have the word incorrigible. So it should say Mr. with no period, but a space, Zeppo. And the profile picture should be the look within, the revolution is in your mind logo. Well, it's not really a logo, but it's a meme. I stole some image. Forgive me, artist, whoever I stole this image from. It's awesome and perfect. And I borrowed it. Sorry, not sorry. Please don't sue me, etc., etc. All disclaimers apply herein. All of this originated, actually, to touch on the meme idea, because in my humble rediscovering of what to do in life, one of my hobbies that I've developed ever since deciding that I didn't want to be on Instagram as myself, because I am not an Instagram model. Maybe if I had a personal trainer and like a nutritionist on staff, but that requires, media mogul status. Help me get there, friends. But digressing, I was going to abandon my Instagram account, but I had sort of become fascinated with memes, and specifically when people out there and or myself have been inspired to make spiritual memes. In the same way that I'm fascinated and or kind of intrigued by other spiritual practices, because what is it when you put images and words together but some sort of devotional craft, if not a full-blown art form, right? Okay, so I quite humorously call that meme farming. And I wound up, finding that I had like an opinion, and critically, my friends, at the center of all this, the idea that there probably were others out there in the world feeling probably a wee bit alone and maybe not necessarily super connected to others of similarly weird spiritual ideas or interests. And mind you, that community, like all others, is categorically not a monolith. There's all kinds of spiritual people doing all kinds of spiritual things, and many of them would disagree with one another. And one of my most popular warning unpopular opinion posts, or warning thingies, warning, what do you call them? Warning labels, is this, and that's that, ego knows the spiritual path, literally, and allegorically the way we use it in our world. It understands it because, it's like, it is that meme of like, don't quote the ancient magic to me. I was there when it was wrought. Ego was around. As if we treat ego, dare I propose to you, dear listeners, not as some malignant cancer within us that must be excised, but rather as our shadow, our darkness, our traumatized, an aspect of where our pain and trauma and suffering goes, that is also yearning for love and healing like anybody else would, like our light side is, and is integral to our being, right? At its healthiest, ego is there to be useful and beneficial to our fundamental survival. But that's a whole nother discussion about like what ego is, how it is defined, and how it is there are many things referenced by that term, which is something about language that happens, which I've rambled about before, I'm sure. So having all these thoughts in my head, and having always been told by friends and family that I could have, should have been a lawyer, because I love presenting my point of view on things, or I could have, should have, would have gone into broadcasting and been a radio show host. Man, if there's a totally alternate universe I kind of wish I had access to, It's the one where I already am, like the spiritual community radio talk show host guy with a thriving career and a big, huge audience and an international, bestseller of a book series, etc. But here we are. I didn't do that. Not yet, anyways. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Say no more, say no more. And maybe I'm kidding myself, right? Maybe I will only host this silly podcast for another year or two and then retire from it. It is most sincerely sometimes quite daunting. I wouldn't go so far as to say fear-inducing, but it's definitely a bit stressful to be like, what am I going to talk about tomorrow? I don't know, man. But in terms of what drives me and what drives what I hope is sort of a dispersed but sort of cohesive theme throughout the show, can be considered encapsulated and embodied in what I would argue is my seemingly disjointed, sometimes to I think some people's ears, a bit abrupt thesis. I happen to use this as my profile text for my Insight Timer account, which is the real life widget I like to listen to music on whilst I meditate most of the time. In passing, I totally dig it. That's a real life, honest, genuine endorsement. No one's paying me to say that, so don't accuse me of it. So on the profile, my log line or my tagline is, "We have always been each other. Namaste." Peace is possible. All-inclusive, species-wide, pineal gland activating, third eye opening, transcendent enlightenment is possible. Transformative spiritual evolution is our birthright. Never let the system tell you otherwise. Despite the fact that humanity has been enslaved by perpetual war profiteers for centuries, we can empower ourselves and each other with direct action. Meditation practice as a methodology of protest. I put that out there for y'all now. Just as a sort of tentpole, as an organizing ingredient, so that when you come across it again, you'd be hearing it, not for the first time. And maybe it'll help all my otherwise sometimes seemingly very incoherent rambling start to mesh. I hope. One hopes that there is a madness to this logic that is working in my favor. I could be wrong. And I tell you what, I live with that every moment of every day. I could be wrong about everything. And that is a double-edged sword that plunges deep, dear friends. If I may say, I stand by something, and this is text from the Sprecher.com profile page. If you've never been, I humbly invite you to come visit, check it out. Maybe follow me on there so that, all the good things that can happen. But I call this show an experimental, and then in quotes, talk radio style podcast show. And it's, I try to be thoughtful in my wording, and I think I put the word show there at the end because it almost feels redundant. I wish there had been a way to have put show at the beginning of it so that the word show was in there twice, but I think it serves its function. It's silly, and I'm the first to admit I'm a weirdo, but I'm also kind of serious. I really want to explore the radical intersection, and let me pause here and go on a rant, if I may. I don't know what department you're supposed to send your sternly worded letter to about the egregious, disrespectful disabuse of a word that has drifted off its relaxed and groovy definition that is overall, generally speaking, positive. But can we do something about radical? Because radical used to be cool, man. Hey, check out this trick I can do on my BMX bike I've been practicing all year. Radical, man. Okay, right? To be silly about it. But now, obviously, in this hyper-politicized, hyper-extremified echo chamber of echo chambers of echo chambers of echo chambers, radical means something else now. And I am grumpy about it. It means something annoying that we just don't need as humans. We do not need to be radical tribalists. We do not need to be party entrenched, radical, us versus them is zombies. Dear friends, I beg you. Is that a crazy statement? Is that too much to suggest? I'm not such an anti-statist as to be lumped into that radical left of anarchists, which I'm not. Like, right? You know, they look at me and like, what? This guy makes no sense. Love everybody? Fuck him. I have no fucks to give. And maybe that's something we stumbled into that wasn't the best choice, right? Coolifying no giving a fuck. Maybe we need to back the fuck up out of that. I humbly propose to y'all. But yeah, radical. I don't like that it means extremist, basically, and that it is hyperbolically and hypnotically invoked of all camps, right? There are radical centrists, yo. Like, what the... Only in Trumptopia is there a radical left that the radical right can finally boogeyman and defend the rest of us against as they cook up a radical centrist deep state conspiracy. We just can't... Can we stop using the word radical that way? All right. Rant done. Rant over. Because I would like to explore using the positive, upbeat, groovy, awesome, fascinating, exciting sense of the word for this radical intersection of politics, society, and spirituality in a admittedly unorthodox and a bit rough around the edges fashion, comma, with music. So, in a perfect world, imagine it with me, dear listeners, because I think the more we invoke it together, the more it might possibly come to pass. And of course, those kinds of things all require effort and actual, like, work done. But that's on me, right? Imagine a show where there's a band. We got a featured guest coming on to talk about a special subject. Whatever you want, from spirituality to economics to politics to coronavirus to conspiracy theory to whatever. I'm your friendly, universally inclusionist. Everyone has a beam in their eye. No one is free of pain and trauma. Everybody needs healing. Robot from the future, sent here to remind you of your own humanity. Host of your podcast show. And instead of me just rambling and or occasionally playing you loop-de-loop remix things that I, made using a fun app that isn't really music, at least not my music, there's like, a band. It's like, today they're going to play something funky and sort of retro nuanced 70s with a little bit of discotheque electronica vibe thrown in for good measure. To the next day, it sounds like they're, a 17-piece orchestra. Now, understanding that my show is not that, thank you for tuning in and enjoy listening to all 300 and I think now 38 or 39, almost 340 episodes. And for those of you who have been long-time listeners, thank you for your support. You're the reason I get over my self-doubt and, self-criticism and anxiety about performing and get on the air and talk at you until I lose my voice, which I'm getting better about. And knock on wood, I don't have to go through that anymore because that was painful. But thanks for being there. Thanks for tuning in and supporting the show. And keep on keeping on. So there was something I wanted to say, and I don't remember where it's at. I wrote it down, or it was a thought I had. But yeah, we live in a wild moment in the ongoing story of humanity. And as we take a survey of the public discourse, this is the point, the thing I wanted to come full circle to. I've always had the thought that while there's plenty of spirituality content out there, I don't see the normalized, welcoming, inclusive crossover into, the quote, lamestream, mainstream media. No judgment. Like I said, I don't buy into any one monolithic theory about anybody. So, media is media. It's got problems, it's got virtues, it's got things it's doing right, it's got things it's doing wrong. And if you're going to dismiss the whole lot because you're deeply convinced of some absolutist theory about it, someone's probably got you drinking on some Kool-Aid. The bottom line is, folks, we have an opportunity with this proliferation of technologies and the supposed, I don't know how much I buy into this, but it gets touted out there, the supposed democratization of content vis-a-vis this explosion of independent creators, right? And here's a fascinating thing about it. All art, whether it's in this format or hanging in a museum or being performed for you, 7 nights a week at a stage on Broadway, which, bless it, remains dark. Art is of the moment. I'm reminded of a discussion in Midnight Gospel, to keep things interconnected and webby. One of the guests, and I believe this is episode 5, which happens to be my favorite episodes of the series. If you haven't seen it, go watch it. It's on Netflix. If you don't have Netflix, bum it off a friend. And or start a campaign begging the producers to stream it on YouTube for free for X amount of time. Because I think they would say yes to that. I have a sneaky hunch. I don't know nothing, right? But if I were in that room, I'd be like, yeah, okay, let's put it up there for 2 months. Somebody start that write-in campaign. What was I saying? Episode 5. There's something in there that's meaningful. What is it? That the Bardo loop is real. But that's sort of like a really blunt and complex statement to dive into. I'm not going to get into it today. But I think some form of that is legit, like a thing that happens in the complex and mysterious void that is the gap between death and birth. Go check it out. There is, to forge forward from a sort of, had us, a moment of brain fartage, there is truly, in my humble opinion, a calling, right? A calling set forth by nature herself, that which we call mother, and we can, could, should, would tune into it and check it out. And that's what this show is really about. All political pontificating aside, like, that stuff is fun games, but it really could just be neat and efficient civic organization and civic action instead of all the shenanigans that we call politics. And we could, collectively, as a species, make more important the collective evolutionary progress, in terms of our participation in it. Because it's something we are invited to by nature to check out. Well, I'll leave you to ponder those final statements for today's episode of the Almost Daily ZenCast. As always, thank you for tuning in. I have been your humble host. And until next time, may peace, love, and grooviness blossom in your heart, my dear friends. This is the Almost Daily ZenCast. Hello, and namaste. Thank you for tuning in to today's episode. I am your humble host, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo. Let's get started. Wonk wonk, I played the wrong thing. I won't torture with the outro. I think I'm going to take a day off and then drop a few more episodes, so see you soon, friends.